Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Jeremy today. Jeremy is an individual who's a friend of another individual that was on the podcast a few episodes ago from up in Minnesota. Her name is Holly. And Jeremy figured he would reach out and share some interesting things that he has also had happen up there in Minnesota. So welcome to the show, Jeremy. How's it going today?
Hey there. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Been waiting to talk to you for a while, ever since I got your sign of it. It sounds like it's going to be very interesting. But before we get into it, Jeremy, are there any things about yourself that the listeners might need to know for context?
That really would set me apart from anyone else in terms of relating to Bigfoot. But I guess I'm a music producer. I enjoy nature and the outdoors. I like to consider myself an amateur naturalist. So I'd like to learn how to identify plants and mushrooms and that sort of thing, and just learn about survival in the wild is interesting to me. I'm into spirituality in a number of different realms. So I guess that's all I can think of that might be relevant.
Very interesting. Jeremy, feel free to take us back to as far as we need to go when you first had your Bigfoot interactions start off, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Okay. First experience I had was when I was a kid. I'm honestly not really sure how old I was. Guessing this happened in the late 90s. My best guess, after thinking about this for a few years, is probably 1998. I would have been less than 10 years old. So I grew up in Shoreview, Minnesota. Shoreview is on the northern edge of the metro area of the Twin Cities. So just to the south of me is suburban shopping malls and things like that. And just to the north of me is like farmland, and it's more rural and there's more forest and things like that. But I grew up right next to this nature preserve called Rice Creek Nature Preserve. I just wanted to set the setting for this story. But so my neighborhood backs right up to this nature preserve. One day I was at the neighbor's house down the street, and I was inside with my brother and the two neighbors, and their parents were there, and we were running around the house, playing Nerf Wars, I think it was. Some kind of game. We were screaming, making lots of noise, having fun. And I just have this memory from that day going down to the basement. I ended up there alone for a short period of time. And I remember looking out the sliding glass door into the backyard and seeing this. At the time, I guess I probably would have only described it as a monster or a creature. But I saw this thing. It looked humanoid. It was bipedal. It was standing on 2 feet, and it looked tall. It was covered in long blonde hair from head to toe. I'd say the hair is maybe like 5 to 6 inches long on the arms and legs, a little bit longer on the head, it seemed like. And the hair was like covering the face where I couldn't see its face. And it was in motion the whole time I saw it. And so I just saw this thing on the right side of the yard, and it was so strange. Like, my memory is weird. It's funny because my memory of this thing is blurry, and people always make fun of Bigfoot being blurry. At the time, I didn't think that this thing was Bigfoot, but I saw it on the right side of the yard, and then it looked like a blur between its position there. And then again, I saw it solid in the center of the yard. And I just have this image burned into my mind of it there. While it was in the center of the yard, it was probably like 30 feet away from me with a pane of glass between us. But it was in that classic Bigfoot pose with the legs crossed over and the torso twisted to the opposite way that the legs are crossed or stepping, and then its arms were swayed out. It had disproportionately long arms. Like it looked lanky, like it didn't have the same proportion as human. The head sat on top of its shoulders. And yeah, it was as if it looked at me, but I couldn't see its face. I just felt like it looked at me, and then it either disappeared or it turned and quickly moved straight towards the tree line and disappeared, or I just got scared with this, which is what happened. I got scared and I ran away from the window and I hid in the corner of the basement. So I don't know if it actually disappeared in front of my eyes or if I just didn't stick around to see what it did. So that was the extent of the sighting. It probably lasted 3 seconds, maybe. The thing moved so quickly, like a blur. And then I got scared and hid in the corner and screamed. The parents came downstairs and were asking what was wrong. And I told them I saw a monster in the backyard. Of course, the parents go look in the backyard. They don't see anything. And I'm not sure what they said, but I could have imagined they probably just said, like, you imagined it, or I don't see anything. It must have been a deer or whatever. And yeah, as far as I knew, I had seen Boogeyman, but it's just so strange because I didn't tell my parents, or at least that I know of or remember. And I asked my parents about this since, and they don't remember me saying anything about seeing a monster. And I think that's about it to say about that story, other than I forgot about it. And I've heard about this a lot where a memory is traumatizing for a kid to see something like that. And so your memory compartmentalizes it. And I really do feel like that's what happened to me because I remember remembering this encounter several times throughout my life until I was maybe 15. The memory would pop up and I would be like, oh, there's that weird memory again of this thing. What was that? I don't know. And I would just brush it off and forget about it again. And I didn't think about it or remember it again until I think 2021, when some friends of mine had been living out in Washington, and they said that they were out in a remote location hiking, and they heard these sounds that were definitely, in their words, Sasquatch. So, and before that, I was a skeptic, but I got interested because I trusted these friends of mine. And I went and I started listening to all the podcasts I could find where people call on and tell their stories like I'm doing now. And I would watch documentaries and watch videos of supposed Bigfoot sightings. And after a while, the repetition of the details of the sighting became so intense that it triggered a full memory recall. I had that memory come back up into the front of my mind again, and I saw it like I'd experienced it yesterday. Now, a couple of years since then, the memory's faded and it's not as clear. But I had that aha moment where I thought I finally understood what that memory was. That I was like, did I see a Bigfoot? There's no way. Bigfoot in Minnesota, like at the time I had only thought that Bigfoot was more of a Pacific Northwest thing. So I said, Bigfoot in Minnesota, no. Also in the suburbs, in a backyard, no. And then the last detail that was throwing me off was the fact that it was blonde. and I'd never heard of a blonde Bigfoot before. I still was in disbelief, and I went and I searched on Google Bigfoot in Minnesota, and the first thing that pops up is an episode from America Unearthed called "Tracking Bigfoot in Minnesota," and they interviewed 2 or 3 eyewitnesses who all had their sightings in or around the Rice Creek Nature Preserve, which is like a couple blocks from my house. So basically, in this episode, I learned that this nature preserve that I've been visiting since I was a little kid, that's like a couple blocks away, is a Bigfoot hotspot. And that blew my mind. And I was almost convinced at that point, and the blonde detail was still throwing me off. And I did some more research. I went to the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, I think, website, and went to Minnesota, found the closest counties to where, my county where I had the sighting. It doesn't say that there's any sightings, but the closest county, which is just on the other side of the creek, had like 6 or 7 reported sightings, I think. And one of those sightings, which is actually the closest one to my neighborhood where I had mine, was in 1988, perhaps 10 years prior. 2 10-year-old girls were in the woods playing, and they saw what they described at the time as a blonde gorilla. And BFRO has since followed up with those eyewitnesses, and now they describe what they saw as a blonde Bigfoot. They didn't know what Bigfoot was back then, so they didn't know what to call it. They called it a gorilla. And at that point, I was a believer, not just a believer, a knower. Since then, my life has been pretty interesting. I've become a little obsessed with the topic. Also, another memory surfaced that something happened back in 2015 that I didn't understand, that after having this memory recollection and learning everything that I have about Sasquatch, according to eyewitness reports and researchers, that in 2015, we went, my partner and I went camping one weekend up on Lake Superior on the beach on the Wisconsin side. And we laid out a blanket, made a fire, and camped out underneath the stars. And we stayed up late just looking at the stars. And probably around 3 a.m, I think, we saw like a whole bunch of UFOs, UAPs, not really sure what to call them. Orbs, I think, would be the most accurate description of what we saw. It's basically, it looks like a ball of light, maybe like a satellite or something. It appears like it's very high up in the sky, but it's usually brighter and then sometimes tinted orange. And these things were moving all over the place in crazy movements back and forth and appearing, disappearing, flashing and stuff like that. Not just moving straight across the sky at a steady pace like a satellite. During this barrage of UFO activity, all of a sudden a face appears in the sky. It was as if this face just superimposed itself over the sky, where it was opaque. I could see through it, but it was there. And this face looked like those Polynesian masks, or like the Salish totem poles. Sometimes they have a face of, I'm not sure what they call them here, but the Sasquatch. Or it also looked like a Neanderthal. Its facial features were more native. Had the energy of like a chief or some kind of tribal leader, some type of humanoid or human being that was closely connected with nature. And it had a large mouth, I remember the lips being, like the mouth being wider. And this face just appears, looks down at me, and it goes, ooga booga booga. And then just as quickly as it had appeared, it disappeared like smoke. And when it made the sound, it was a really deep, a big sound where I felt it in my body. And my partner didn't experience this or see it. And I told her about it and I didn't understand it. But I went and I drew this face that I'd seen. I might still have the picture that I drew somewhere, but I just thought it was funny. I drew it in red ink, this tribal looking face. And like years later now, I've watched, I don't know if you're familiar with probably Thinker Thunker, his YouTube channel. He's got the little intro video with a little Bigfoot face that's red, and it goes, that is actually very similar to what I saw. If you can imagine that face just appearing in the sky and going, and yeah, I didn't know what the heck that was. It was another experience I just brushed off. And after learning about Sasquatch mind speak and remembering that I had this encounter, I wondered if that I actually experienced Sasquatch mind speak. I went and I did a quick Google search of Ooga Booga, and I found out that is caveman for hello. So I wonder if maybe for some reason a Sasquatch type being was being silly and said hello to me using mind speak. So that was the other memory I recovered. Since then, I have had two brief experiences and also some other maybe found weird bent tree structures and footprints in the woods, but I'm a skeptic about that type of thing. I just became curious, and so now when I'm out foraging for mushrooms or whatever, I'm looking for other details as well. But so the other two experiences I wanted to talk about were um, last year. Well, it's the second now. So, 2023 in September. Um, I so throughout the summer, I was going down to, and I have a fort that I started building by the creek. And I would go down and work on this fort maybe 2-3 days a week throughout the summer. And one night in September, I don't usually go there at night, so I thought that was interesting. I showed up just after sunset, and I was going to walk out to my fort, and there's this little deer trail that goes from the parking lot out to the creek, and really no one goes on the trail. It's not a marked trail. It's hard to see too. I never see anyone going back there except for in the winter. But about 40 feet down this trail, I come upon, in the middle of the trail, sitting perpendicular to it, it was the body of a goose, a full-grown goose, just sitting there, but there was no head or neck attached to the body. There was just a hole where the head and neck were, and there was no blood. No blood, no ruffled feathers. Like it looks like it just walked down the trail, turned, sat down, and its head popped off. Um, I thought that was really bizarre. And then I found the head and neck together in the grass off to the side, and then I found part of one of the wings also in the trail at a T intersection where if you go left, it goes to my fort, and if you go right, it just trails off into the brush. The So also the piece of wing was uh, had no ruffled feathers and there was no blood. Same thing with the head and the neck. They all looked in perfect condition. And that was so bizarre to me. It actually freaked me out a little bit. I was so freaked out, I didn't even take pictures. There's also like a lady sitting at the bench over by the parking lot. I didn't want to be this weird guy like taking pictures of a dead goose. I don't know what was going through my mind, and I beat myself up for not taking pictures. But so I just didn't understand what could have done that, or why. Like a human, why would they have done that? I couldn't imagine how they would have done that. Coyotes, there are coyotes back there, but again, they probably wouldn't have left it so nice. The only thing that really made sense to me was potentially Sasquatch, because I've heard of them gifting beheaded creatures and weird sorts of gifts like that before. And also the placement of the body parts along the trail resembled a Nordic rune that I had been drawing on sticks in my fort when I would go there. Why was I drawing a rune? I don't know. I guess I wanted to explore my Nordic roots and I play with magic. And maybe I shouldn't have been doing that, but I was. And so I was drawing this rune, not knowing much about it other than it was a protection symbol of some kind. The rune is called Resouces, and I found out later that Resouces it means thorn, and it also means giant. So that was significant because my fort is built in a thicket of buckthorn trees. Like when I would be out there building this fort, I'd be constantly getting stabbed by these giant thorns and it was a pain. And I was back there like doing really minimal work to clear the invasive buckthorn. Also, the fact that the rune means giant was really interesting to me because these Sasquatches are giants. And I don't know, it was just such a weird experience that this goose appeared in the arrangement that resembled that rune. And it's too strange to be a coincidence. I feel like it has to have some meaning there. And since I've been doing more research about Nordic lore and trolls and things like that and giants, and it's just been a fascinating journey. I've been talking a lot and I'm feeling a little long-winded, but I want to get to the last little experience that I've had here, and then maybe you can ask me some questions if you have any. I had that experience last year at the end of 2023, right before I moved out to the West Coast. I live in Oregon now, in Southern Oregon. So about a year ago, I was at a gathering. It was a Christmas gathering in Southern Oregon, and music and dancing and things like that. We had people over at this house until maybe around 4 in the morning is when everyone cleared out. So like when everyone was clearing out at 4 in the morning, there was a thick fog that had come into the valley and just blanketed the place. Like you couldn't see more than 10, 15 feet in front of you. As soon as everyone left, except for myself, the property owner, and a couple others who were staying on the property in vehicles, the fog had completely cleared, and you could now see the stars in the sky. I was sitting out back by the fire with the property owner talking, and we noticed a light above the ridge line. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, that's not a plane. And so I point up at it. Actually, I'm not even sure if I pointed at it, but the homeowner said, "What is that?" And I said, "That's a UFO." To me, very clearly, it was giving off that sort of energy, the way that it was moving. It was changing its trajectory. It was, I don't really know how to explain it, but we watched it disappear behind the ridge line. Shortly after, we went inside and went to go settle down and go to sleep. Went to a bedroom that's situated nearest a creek that runs, a major creek that runs through the property. And there's a dog in the room with us. There's two cats. All of a sudden, we hear a bang, bang, like something big was banging on the side of the house. It spooked both of us, and it spooked the dog too. Normally, when the dog is like someone's at the house, the dog will freak out and start barking, like, I'm going to tell you to go away, blah, 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 that sort of energy. But she started barking nervously, like she was scared. The cats also jumped up and we're looking around inquisitively. Then we heard something bang on the house again. We instantly left the room and got away from the wall. And one more time, we heard 3 times banging on the wall. And I decided to jump outside and run around the house. I don't know that I would recommend doing that, but that's what I decided to do. Anyways, and I circled the house quickly. I ran around the house 3 times. I didn't find anything. It didn't make sense to me. If something was standing there banging on the wall, I should have seen it or heard it running away, but there was just nothing. So I come back inside, and the homeowner's like, "What was it?" And I said, "I don't know. It was honestly probably Sasquatch messing with us." And they scoffed at me, which I just find amusing. And so I don't know what that was, but I think it was interesting anyways. Yeah, so basically, that's my story in a nutshell.
Jeremy, you've experienced some really interesting stuff. Thank you for sharing all that. I mean, I just want to say, first off, I did not know that about the Minneapolis area, that Rice Creek. So that is very cool. I'm going to be looking into that. But I want to go back to, you know, that sighting that you had as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
When you, and it was so, I mean, you said just a few seconds, right?
It could, yeah, it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's such an old memory. And like the memory seems like a moment frozen in time. So I could have been standing there staring at this thing for who knows how long. But it was probably, 3 seconds ish, 4 seconds.
I'm guessing in such a short amount of time, were you able to get any emotional state from what it was that you saw, or did it just happen so quick?
I can't say for sure, but I didn't get the feeling that it was necessarily neither angry nor happy. I didn't feel like its movement was hostile. Maybe it seemed more curious than anything, because it did appear to look at me or notice me, even though I couldn't see its face, and it's just all hair in my memory.
Mm. Is there one detail that you remember noticing about it that you could say, yes, absolutely, what I saw that day was a Bigfoot because of this one thing that I noticed? It was just so blatant.
It's hard for me to boil it down to just one thing, since this memory is so old. It feels distant to me, almost like a dream, even though I know it's not a dream, because I don't have any memories of dreams that are like this. Like I can tell the difference between a memory and a dream. But it was all of the details combined that really made it definitive for me. I guess, for one, being covered from head to toe in hair. Its height, I would guess maybe it was around 7 feet tall, give or take a foot. And its head sat on its shoulders, and it was lanky. Like, it wasn't like bulky like the typical Bigfoot descriptions, or it wasn't like Patty either. What I saw would have been probably taller and skinnier than Patty. But the fact that it was lanky and covered in hair, and its head sat on its shoulders. When I say lanky, like disproportionate length of its arms to its torso and legs, and just the way that it moved, like it was as if it ran across the yard, but I can't see its feet, its legs like moving in my memory. I just see it like freeze frame here, freeze frame there, almost as if like the frame rate of my perception was too slow to capture its movements
Mm.
in a fluid manner, is how I would describe it, or like lag in a video game kind of thing. That detail also stands out to me. Um, it just seems too coincidental. That's like a common thing that people describe with Sasquatch, strangeness in how they move and maybe like time dilation type things. Not that I recall experiencing time dilation.
Was there a time then when you got older that you went back to the adults in that situation and say, hey, do you remember anything weird about when I was a kid at this place and I just freaked out and said I saw something?
Yeah, so I've asked my brother who was there. I've talked to both my mom and my dad and told them that I remember seeing Bigfoot when I was a kid, and do you guys remember me saying anything about it? And they don't remember hearing anything about it. And I've tried to reach out to the parents of the neighbors, but I didn't really try very hard, and I don't know, I didn't want to be weird and be like, hey, you guys, I think I saw Bigfoot, and I just don't think that they would even really remember. Like, the only reason I remember, and that was difficult, is because it was such an intense experience for me, and no one else there experienced it. Yeah, I haven't got a chance to talk with the homeowners on the property where it occurred. I do recall having a series of um, nightmares around the time that I would place this experience. And I talked to my mom about that, and she remembers me having those nightmares and puts it in the same time frame. So I was having two dreams. One of them that was reoccurring was these dogs that would appear in like the what's it called? The furnace room. They would appear in the furnace room in my house, and I would get scared and they would chase me. Big, big kind of German Shepherd like dogs. And the other dream that I had that was reoccurring was I was in my elementary school and I would walk down the hallway and there's this room, this like door that I never actually went inside this room when I was at the school, so I don't know what's in there. But in the dream I go into this room and it's just the lights off. It's just an empty room except for like some shelving and boxes, a warehouse. And I go in there and then I notice very quickly that there's something else in the room with me. And I get stuck in the corner of this room and because this thing is over by the door and I'm just like hiding behind some boxes, scared for my life, and all I see is this silhouette of this tall bipedal being with glowing red eyes. And I think I had that dream 2 or 3 times. And again, having as an adult learning about Sasquatch and the experience that people have and learning about glowing red eyes and like seeing this black silhouette made me wonder if that dream was related to Sasquatch somehow, and if I started having those nightmares because I had that experience and my psyche was unable to process it.
That's a really interesting detail how you did have those dreams after in the same area of time that you had that sighting. As you probably know from viewing a lot of things like this, it's not just seeing the Bigfoot or experiencing the Bigfoot, it's what it does to you afterwards. And that's almost more than half of it from what I found. It's the dreams. It's sometimes what you start to hear. Sometimes you hear voices. Sometimes stuff starts to move around your house by itself. It'd be interesting to know if there were other weird things that happened around the house at that time, and maybe you just weren't aware of them as a young child.
Yeah, no, I'm not really sure if my parents would remember.
Absolutely. You said that this was close to the Rice Creek area, correct?
Yes.
Now, was the actual house close to the Rice Creek area, or?
Yep,
Okay.
the neighborhood backs right up to it. Some of the houses in the neighborhood, their backyards connect to the preserve.
Gotcha. And the preserve is made out of a group of different lakes, correct?
Yep, there's a chain of lakes there. There's a little gas station there that's called Quick Stop, or a little strip mall with a gas station called Quick Stop, and it was right behind the Quick Stop in one of the backyards there.
Gotcha. There's a trend that I'm seeing come out. It's really weird. Is all these sightings are starting to come out from, you could be considered urban sightings. There's the ones that just came out from Omaha, from the BFRO reports over the last 20 years. There's an individual that reached out to me with some situations that have been happening right by the Kansas City Zoo down there. A similar situation. It's just, I think people might tend to not take the urban reports seriously, but I think we need to take them seriously because these areas weren't urban for all time. Humans made them urban. But when you were talking about how you said that there was the blonde hair, right? And then you had actually read the report where I believe you said there were younger children in the same area had also a sighting of a blonde gorilla. How did that affect you when you read that report and you realized how was your emotional state during the reading of that report?
I don't know if ecstatic is the right word. I was mind blown. I could not believe that the odds. I've literally never heard. I still think to this day, maybe I've heard one other report of a blonde Sasquatch. It's not something I hear common. Usually it's auburn colored or pitch black. And just the fact that the closest sighting to the location where I believed that I had this sighting was a blonde. I was absolutely mind blown. And bewildered, fascinated. I'm not really sure.
I think if I was trying to put myself in that situation, I would feel definitely similar. I think I would feel it would be an extreme validation. I would be like, oh, I really did experience this. Someone else also in the same area, blonde Sasquatch. It's absolutely incredible when stuff like that happens.
Yeah, still like in a bit of a state of disbelief, but like at this point, the evidence has stacked up far too much for this to have just been a figment of my imagination or a dream that I had when I was a kid.
And maybe I'll talk to the listeners for a little bit. It'd be interesting to hear if other people have had situations happen Bigfoot related in this Rice Creek area or in this area in Minneapolis. Listeners can definitely feel free to reach out. Best way is bigfootsociety@gmail.com. My email address there. But is this a type of area that would have a ranger in charge of it or some sort of worker?
Yeah, there's a ranger. It's probably a smaller operation. It's like a regional park. So there's a park ranger. I do know I spoke with Doug Haijcek.
Doug Haijcek, yeah.
Yes, at a good amount about this, and then also the area there. And shoot, what was I going to say? Oh, yes. So I talked to Doug about the park there, and he said that I can't remember if it was him that went out with a ranger or if the ranger contacted him or what, but they found like a pile of it was either animal limbs, like deer limbs, or a pile of like deer and animal carcasses that were missing limbs. One of the two. Something strange that they had found in the park, and the ranger had spoken with or brought Doug or some other Bigfoot researcher out there to check it out.
Okay, so now this is getting to be a whole different, because this is a different level, because and I'm sure you're probably aware, like, if listeners don't know who Doug Haijcek is, like, he is an amazing individual who's done Bigfoot research in the Legends Meets Science documentary, and he just invents so many things to do with cryptid research, and just to know that this is big enough that he also has checked out the area. Dude, I want to check it out myself.
He claims to have had his own sighting in the area about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, as well. He said it was just walking down the side of the road, like in the ditch, and he said other people saw it as well. I was like, why didn't you take a picture? What the heck, Doug? And he was like, I don't know.
Oh, in the Rice Creek area?
Yeah, in that area, just walking down the side of the road.
That's wild.
But yeah, it's a beautiful park. I definitely recommend getting out there. There's a bike trail that goes through it. And you want to take your bike and go bike through and check out some of the nature there. I don't know how successful you'd be with research in the area just because it's so rural, but you never know.
Yeah, exactly. And listeners might be, oh, this sounds like it's a small park in the middle of Minneapolis, but looking it up, this is like more than a 5,000 acre park, right? It's pretty substantial.
It's pretty long. I'm not really sure how far the trail system stretches, but it's got to be at least 15 miles. I'm not really sure. Maybe that's overestimate.
Extremely interesting. You've given me another place to look into. Not that's super close to me. It's one state north, so I'm down in Iowa. But
yeah, I'd be curious to hear other stories from the area. I showed Doug a little map that I had created of sightings in the park reserve area, and he's like, that map is way out of date and incomplete. He's like, it's missing a bunch of sightings. So I guess he's talked to quite a few people in the area who've had encounters.
So just approximate, but how many sightings now should be on that map? Like a ballpark number?
Don't quote me on this,
right.
But I think I remember Doug saying hundreds, and he might have been exaggerating.
It sounds like it's definitely more than 5. It's,
more than whatever is recorded on BFRO.
Right. Okay, got it.
I haven't even reported. So,
wow, that is extremely interesting. You mentioned though that you're not in the Minnesota area anymore. You're out there in Southern Oregon, correct?
Correct.
Now, I've spent time out there, and it's such an interesting. The state is incredible. What was it like getting used to it? I don't know if you can get used to the state, because just in the fact that there's so much Sasquatch saturation in the culture. What was it like to move to a place where now you're in the thick of it, of what you experienced as a little child?
Oh gosh, it's been surreal. It just feels like a dream, There's a bit of it in Minnesota because Minnesota is a hotspot for Bigfoot, more northern Minnesota particularly. And we'll have the Bigfoot cutouts when you're driving down the freeway. You'll see it occasionally, and every once in a while you'll see something related to it, but it's just not as big a part of the culture as it seems to be out here. When I first moved here, I moved to Happy Camp, California, and I just got a kick out of that. It wasn't even like I did it on purpose. It had nothing to do with Sasquatch, but I ended up in Happy Camp, which happens to be the closest town to the closest significant town to the Patterson-Gimlin footage site. And in the center of town, they got this big old Sasquatch statue. And just around here in Southern Oregon, I've checked out a couple of the little Bigfoot shops, and I've talked to some random people. I'll just ask them, yeah, you ever seen Bigfoot? And some people will actually say yes and then tell you their story. And actually, in the town that I live in, several people have told me their stories in the area. I'm just going to probably omit the actual area that I live, but quite a few people in the town have had experiences in the area. And yeah, it's been validating and surreal.
It's a thing where if you're talking about Southern Oregon, it really doesn't matter where you are because
Mhm.
there's so many areas that are just really thick with activity. And you've got there's stuff that's happened in the Rogue River National Forest. The closer to the coast you get, there seems to be more activity. You've got that sighting that happened in I think maybe it was Cave Junction, but then over in Applegate, you've got the famous Bigfoot trap on your, I don't know if you've ever gone out and seen that, but that's a pretty cool deal.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I went up there this year and checked it out. It was interesting, and I just found it amusing that someone would take the time to build that, even if just as a gimmick, like someone did that. Like, I think that says something about Sasquatch in this area.
Oh, absolutely. And have you gone out camping at all yet? Overnights, things like that.
Not really. I did go out camping one night, and I stayed in a camper van, so I wasn't like really outside in a tent exactly. So I haven't really put myself out there and had a chance to maybe experience some of the spooky activity people experience in the forest at night out here.
Mm. And just as maybe a follow up, but living out there, and this doesn't have to necessarily be Sasquatch related, but have you experienced anything that is just plain weird out there that is really hard to explain?
Definitely, like orbs, like UFOs is always strange, and how do you explain that? I don't know, but I've seen those in pretty much any state I've been in, so it's not anything new to Oregon. Other than, yeah, I don't know. I found some weird things in the forest. For example, I found this cedar tree that was bent over and twisted 360 degrees, or at least 180 or 360 degrees around, and it goes down into the ground, and then it comes back up out of the ground, and the top of the tree is still growing upright, and part of the tree is underground. It's just bizarre, but I guess that could be explained some other way. Um, there was one thing I wanted to mention. I had a friend of mine report to me, just because I'm into this kind of thing, that a friend of his out near Prospect, Oregon, saw something in the forest they described as like a ball of fire that had descended into the tree line. And he sent me this picture, and it looks like a forest fire in the woods, but when it was sent, it was like raining consistently. I don't know, honestly, if this was anything, but it just looked really weird and strange. And I talked to the woman on the phone, and she said that it seemed like it had a consciousness, like it was a being. And when they observed it, when they like looked at it and they shine their car lights at the thing, it got brighter and it started to come towards them, and they got scared and they like drove away. And yeah, that's just pretty bizarre, and I hear stories like that all the time. I've seen things like that, and still don't know exactly what's going on.
Have you ever looked up what ball lightning is?
Ball lightning, yes, I have.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Was it similar to
Um,
that or?
I don't know. I've seen maybe a video of ball lightning before,
Mhm.
um, and that looked blue. This thing in the picture was orange, so I don't know if ball lightning can change colors. But I guess in terms of it being like a glowing orb of light, yeah, I guess you could say it's similar. I don't know a whole lot about ball lightning. Like the UAP orb things that I've seen seem more like um, less like ball lightning than people describe.
Sure. And what an absolutely fascinating discussion. And thank you for sharing what you experienced out there near Rice Creek in Minnesota, Jeremy. I really want to dig more into that. I think I'm going to. Feels like there's a lot going on up there over the years. And I just want to say thank you for coming on the show, for sharing what you experienced, and been a very enjoyable discussion.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
All right. So I just reached out to Daniel. Your last name is public, right? Yeah, it's public.
Yeah.
Okay. I just reached out to Daniel Hamilton, friend. Man, Daniel, this is so unprepared. I can't even remember your episode number, but you're from, of course, the Cryptid Podcast, correct?
Yep, I'm the host of that and the co-host of Mysteries Unknown.
Heck yeah. I just got off the phone with a gentleman who was telling me about his encounter from Rice Creek up there by Minneapolis. And I was like, man, I got to talk to Daniel because he probably knows stuff. So what do you know, my friend?
I do know that Rice Creek is like 15 minutes from my house. And I camped there, or have camped there, a bunch of times. I was doing some research not even a month ago for a buddy of mine who had a Wendigo encounter not far from Rice Creek either. And we're looking for a place to do some investigation work. And that's when I found that there was a sighting near Rice Creek. And so I'm super excited to go out and do some actual field work. I know there's been sighting in that area.
Yeah. So this guy, Jeremy, I was talking to, so he had a sighting as a young kid, and he saw a blonde Bigfoot. But the thing is, he also found another report where some witnesses had seen a blonde Bigfoot in the same area as well. So I would keep an eye out for that detail as well.
I can't wait to listen to this episode that you got hopefully coming out. But the information that I found was a large creature walking across a lake, a frozen lake, or a pond, whatever you want to call it, to a smaller island that had tree outcrops on this little island in this lake. And the couple was out walking their dogs when they saw this thing like flying across the ice. Like, if you've ever been on ice, you're trying to cross ice, you want to be as careful as you can. This thing was flying across the ice, and it went off into this little island. And I think I have the island located, but it's close to the Rice Creek area.
Okay. This, just because it sounds like you've been there, Daniel, this Rice Creek area, do you feel like it could be an area that could support creature like Bigfoot, or do you think they might just be absolutely?
Absolutely, dude, because there's now the way the camping thing is set up is when you come into Rice Creek, you have wetlands and woods all around you. I've seen deer multiple times through that area, rabbits, snapping turtles, squirrels. I assume there's going to be raccoons, possum, everything around that area. Large water source, wetlands, plenty of cover and concealment. Not to mention a lot of campers, they leave their coolers outside of their tents or their campers. So we know they're creatures of opportunity. So it's a good possibility they can be raiding those too. But the times that I've been there, I've heard something, not sure what it was, so I'm not saying it was a Sasquatch. But to me, it didn't sound like anything I've heard before. And we were sitting around a campfire one night when we heard this noise. It was definitely like wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a howl. And everybody's looked at each other, and they asked me what it was, and I go, I don't know, a dog or something? I don't know. Because people bring their dogs camping in this location. But when you come into the park, the Rice Creek Park area, you go to, you go up. If you go to the left, that's where all the camping sites are. And they have electric hookups, they have water hookups, that type of stuff. They also have like a couple of areas of like primitive camping, no hookups, you just camp with a tent. And if you keep going straight, bypass the camping area, that's where you go to the actual the lake. and there's a lake with beaches, with the beach there and everything, a little parking area, then that goes up and around. So it's a pretty large area, but it is in a not truly a residential area, but there are houses on the lake and there are some housing developments around this area. But it would not surprise me in the least.
So is this a kind of area where there's like sometimes in a residential urban type setting where you have like Bigfoot hanging out in an area like this, there's going to be like a green space or like a trail of woods that lead into this? Is this the case, or is it just like an island of forest here?
There are walking trails throughout this area. You can ride your bike through this area, but it's pretty much set up to be a campground.
Okay.
This area. Now, this is the area of Rice Creek that I know of. Now, because I'm only really familiar with that area, I haven't really gone out and explored more of the area. But when I reviewed that story, that encounter, they also mentioned it's near like a state park or like a kind of like Rice Creek recreation area or whatever.
Right.
And I did a Google map on it, and I looked at the area, and I could see how they're connected.
Got it.
So it does look like there is some service roads that go through, and so them traveling back and forth would be pretty easy.
I got to look into this more. Daniel, I don't want to keep you away from your work, but thank you for hopping on for a few minutes and for sharing what it's like up there current day. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, not a problem, man. And I can't wait to hear this episode you're going to put this on for what this individual reported to you. I'm excited about it because, again, it's literally 15, 20 minutes from my house.
Dude, I'm loving it. And guys, if you're not aware of Mysteries Unknown and the Cryptid Podcast, make sure you're checking it out. I'll have links in the description for that as well. But thank you, Daniel.
Hey, man, thanks a lot. Hope you have a good day, and hope you have a Happy New Year.
All right. Well, hey, we've actually got Doug Haijcek on the phone, and listeners are probably familiar with Doug from, of course, the awesome documentary Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. How are you doing, sir?
Good. How are you?
Good. I just reached out to you after I recorded the episode that listeners just had listened to, and I wanted to see if you would be able to take a few minutes to actually share what you experienced in Rice Creek, and I think that would be amazing to hear.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of experience, and where it gets weird is for years I was with the BFRO, and I remember reading the reports, obviously down the road in my own backyard, about people that had seen Bigfoots over in this Rice Creek area between like Centerville and Lino Lakes, and even farther south, because there's a whole chain of actually, I call them, they're entrophicated lakes, meaning they're very old lakes. They're not glacier lakes. We have a lot of in Minnesota that are very clean and deep. These are like filled in old ancient lakes, or basically swamps. Shallow water, very few people, if any, live on them. And they've developed a big state park system around a number of them with a trail system and whatnot. But it's a really unique area. And so I had read the reports years ago. And then one day I decided to buy some land that butted up to two of the lakes, more in the northern corridor. And one night, I had walked out of my building where my workshop is, and I heard some coyotes going off. And then I heard some wood knocks, and I went, what? And then I remembered the old BFRO reports. It just started clicking. I'm realizing that maybe these things are in my own backyard, right? So I mentioned this to a guy that works for me. We were talking. I said, hey, you need to go out and explore all that area, because I had done it and I was really interested in just how wooded it was and desolate and how much land there was back there. These lakes are really unique because almost all of them are barbed wired off. You can't even get in there. In fact, the lake behind me, is, as I got a hold of the owners, apparently they don't let anybody go on that. They've owned it it's been in this club, hunting club, I believe, for 150 years. They're not allowed to even go on it. And so it's a unique area. In fact, apparently they let some botanists explore the area, and they found some plants that were extinct everywhere else, or at least had thought they were extinct all over Minnesota. They found them in that area. So it's a unique area. I want to get that across. Then one day, an employee of mine comes up and mentions, he goes, "Did deer walk upright?" And I went, "No, I don't think so." He said, "This big giant red thing, when I was exploring, I took your advice and I was exploring back there. And as I was exploring, I'd come around a little corner and over a little hill and then down the hill. And there's another curve there. Right when I went down the hill, I was coasting, 2 p.m, bright sunny day. And lo and behold, there's an animal walking across the road, upright. And it was not only upright, it stepped over the barbed wire fence and disappeared into the bush." And he goes, "That must have been a deer, right?" I asked him, "Did it have broad shoulders?" "Yeah, it had broad shoulders." And asked him how tall it was. He's thinking 7.5 feet tall. And I'm like, "Why do you think it was a deer?" He said, "What's the color of a deer?" "This auburn colored." And then he pointed to a pair of shoes in my shoe holder, dress shoes that I have, and there's this lining in one of them, or one pair, that's auburn colored, orangutan colored, right? And I basically convinced him he did not see an upright walking deer. Years later, I was driving back. I had driven out to White Bear Lake with Yvette. We had to run an errand out there, and as on our way out there, there was a water ski show on one of these lakes, probably the deepest one that butts up to Rice Creek Park. And normally there's nothing on that lake. There was nobody that lived on it. But they put in a water ski show, and there was quite a few children gathered around the shore watching this as we drove through this little windy village and windy road out to White Bear Lake. So on our way back, it's starting to get dark, not a ton of light, very dusky. And suddenly on our right side, we see what looks to be a Bigfoot walking with its back to us on the right side that had the most unique hair that I've ever seen. It looked almost like a starling. If you look up a starling, very patchy, little like speckles throughout it, very even, very salt and pepper. It was just weird. If you look up a starling, it's the only way I can describe what this hair looked like. But it's big, probably 7-8 feet tall, big broad shoulders. I can see its legs, I can see its glutes, and it's just plowing. And I mean plowing through these trees and just knocking these little trees down in this ditch. And then suddenly I realized it's going into that Rondell Lake. That's where Joe had his sighting, and where there's been other sightings. And it just basically, I think that it was watching all the kids that were on the shore watching this water ski show. It's the feeling I got. It was probably, there's the woods behind there. It was probably watching them from the woods, and now it's going back. It probably heard this commotion in an area it never heard any commotion. So we see this thing trudging through, and then it disappears down into these thick alders. And there was even cars behind me. They must have seen it. And we were just in shock. And when you're in shock like that, you just keep driving. I didn't know what to do. She's like, "You saw that?" I'm like, "Yeah." And it's over. It's a number of 6-7 seconds of shock. But it all made sense. Everything that we saw made sense based on prior reports, based on the history of the area, the type of environment, because no one's allowed in where this thing was heading. No one's allowed in there. There's not one home. It's just a big kind of a wilderness, swampy, shallow lake. that I'm sure has quite a bit of fish in it. Lots of deer, lots of turkeys, lots of coyotes, a lot of fox, plenty of game for food. And nobody can camp in there. There's no dogs allowed in there. And it's barbed wired off on the whole perimeter of this land. We just went in shock. I've never really experienced shock. Like, why didn't I stop? Why didn't I pull over? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? I think about it. I know I had cars behind me. It's not really any kind of shoulder to pull over, but I still regret not doing that, whipping my camera out and filming. So that's the story, Byron.
That's incredible, Doug. What year was that?
Oh, that would have been probably about 5 years ago now.
Only 5 years ago, Doug?
Yeah, 2020.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was 5 years ago. Joe's sighting happened, and I do recommend if you ever want to talk to Joe, I can get you his number. But Joe was also in shock to the point where he's in denial of what he saw. It all makes sense now. And it was funny, too, because I hooked him up with a tracker that sent him back over to that area. And they drove around this perimeter road that kind of goes around the outside of it where he had a sighting where it crossed. And what's interesting is where it crossed, there was a farm on the left side, and there's a tree break that goes to a lake called Crossways Lake. That's also a big kind of wilderness area that my shop kind of butts up to the land before the forest starts, or where I heard the wood knocking. And he brings his tracker, and he drives the perimeter, and he didn't tell the tracker where he had his sight. He's like, well, you tell me where you think if this thing was going to cross somewhere on this whole long road, where would it cross? And he picked the exact spot that Joe had his sighting. And then Joe was featured in America Unearthed with Scott Wolter and the one Bigfoot episode that they did for America Unearthed. There was also another little caveat to this story. Joe had told me his sighting. Literally, it was days later. He was over. We were working on a project. And on the news came a story of somebody spotting a Bigfoot and getting footage in that same area. And so, of course, we're just on pins and needles waiting for this news story to come on because he had seen this red one. And they show the footage on the news. And sure as heck, you can see it's an auburn-colored Bigfoot that ducks. It's not real long footage. And it's like a lot of the Bigfoot footage, a bit, it's blurry. It's quick, but it's actually, I think, one of the better ones. And it did make its rounds on YouTube. And I can vouch that footage is authentic based on Joe's sighting just days prior. This couple, and apparently it was a farmer couple that had seen this thing, got cell phone footage of it as it ducked into the trees very quickly. It was walking at a very quick pace, ducked under some trees, but it was auburn colored. And then I ran an ad in that local newspaper offering like $1,000 reward or a reward for them to come forward because they dropped the footage off at the news station, wouldn't give their names, didn't want anything to do with it, but wanted it to get it out to the public, what they had seen. But no names were associated. So I ran this ad for a month or so, and in their local newspaper and in the Stillwater newspaper, nobody responded. I never got one response to find them. So,
was this also 5 years ago as well?
No, this goes back. That one, Joe's sighting goes back probably 10, 11 years.
Okay. Wow.
And his, like I said, auburn colored. But it was 2 PM, Byron. It was in front of his truck. 2 PM, unfettered by any trees or anything. Walked in front of his truck, stepped over about a 5-foot barbed wire fence, and was gone, disappeared into the bush.
Wow.
And poor Joe.
Oh, go ahead.
It was a deer. Yeah, it was just, like you said, I feel sorry for the guy because he was convinced it was a deer. He didn't even want to tell me. Yes. just felt silly. Deer walking upright, right?
Wow. So I just tried to do a quick search. I've never heard or that footage. I've never heard of footage from that area, but yeah, if that's something where it is online or like I couldn't find it on YouTube, I just spent a minute though. I would love to see that footage if you know where it is.
I've heard it called the Stillwater footage, or the St. Croix footage. And see, that area is due east, exactly due east where Joe had his sightings on Big Marine Lake is where that sighting happened. So if you just walk due east from this Rondell Lake where he had his sighting and that Rice Creek chain of lakes, it's just due east. And there it was, not even, I don't think, even 4 or 5 miles away from Joe's sighting due towards the St. Croix Valley, which is where I theorize that's where they come from, the St. Croix Valley, Minnesota, and then that's their area that they either traverse, migrate up and down, or live, and then they punch in every now and then to these areas that are untouched, but yet still very much close to the edges, because we have so many deer, so much game, insane. I can't take a drive around that lake without seeing fox, coyotes, owls, turkeys, and just tons of deer. It's just thick with game.
Approximately how many reports do you think have been from this Rice Creek area, Doug?
Oh, I'm going to guess we're probably looking at the official and unofficial. The official ones are probably only 5 or 6 because people are afraid to report them. But I'm thinking now, just the ones I know about, the ones I've heard about from other people, I think we're up to about 20-some.
Oh, my goodness. And how far back would you say year-wise?
What's real interesting is that the road Joe had his sighting on is called Fur Man Road.
Really?
Yeah. Coincidence?
Nah.
Coincidence? I don't know.
That's all.
But see, the sightings, you have to think, when did the BFRO start reporting stuff and where did they even come to an existence? I think back into the 90s. But I'm sure there's been sightings back there forever. And I often wonder, why did those lakes get barbed wired off? Why have they not been touched in 150 years? There's some of the most ancient Indian sites that occupied that area. And I can't think of the name of the tribe, but there's an ancient that goes back thousands of years that inhabited that area. So there's definitely a lot of native history. They found artifacts. And so the lakes, I can name some of them. There starts with like Lamprey Lake, and then there's another of smaller lakes that are too small to even name, and then Rondow, and then George Watch. There's another one. I can't think of it. It's been a while since I've thought about the names of all these lakes, and then the ones that go through the Rice Creek Park, the official park. And that goes far south. But here's where it gets really interesting, Byron. Do you remember the man that went missing, the Henry McCabe story, where they found his body? That's interesting because he took a shortcut through that area.
Oh.
At night.
Oh.
And you remember the scream that was recorded and him saying, "Stop it," and the screaming. And it was a very strange recording.
Oh,
and I don't want to say that he was drowned or killed by a Bigfoot, but that was the first thing that crossed my mind when he went missing through there. And I realized that he had taken a shortcut through that Rice Creek Lake area. And that's where they found him, too. Floating in one of those lakes. Yeah, it's a real spooky area. And I go out there at night and I do surveillance with like really low light cameras where I can set up and do surveillance. and where I can see across like Rondell Lake. I can see all the way across with like a Sony A7 camera that has 550,000 ISO. So it gets down almost it's like color picture and pitch blackness, right? I just need a few stars out and I can see all the way across the lake. And so I can patrol the shoreline and stuff. And I do that, and then I drive the lake real slow. The trouble is, I have a feeling that the neighbors have all had experiences out there. They just really don't want to be bothered by researchers and seem a little tight. In fact, when we were out there filming with Scott Walter, some neighbors got very upset with us.
Oh, wow.
You know, I don't know. Don't want attention drawn to the area. But like I said, it's a whole chain of lakes. It's along 35W. I want to tell you one last story. I was up at the Grand Rapids Bigfoot Conference. I met a couple up there, and they pulled me aside. It's like, hey, we want to tell you a story of it happened to us in those same areas, in that same area, right? I said, sure. And I joined them. I sat down, and they told me about a story where he was anxious to get his mountain bike out. And so he took it out. He got his tires pumped up, and he took a little ride. It was in March. It was still very cold out. It's dark. It's like 8 o'clock at night. And so he takes this ride. Where do you think he goes? He goes along some of the trails along these intrafficated lakes, right? The same lake chain, but more towards the south, towards White Bear. In fact, not too far from the White Bear Theater, there's some of these lakes and ponds and woods. And so he's riding his bike, and he's riding by, and he hears this big, giant splash. He said it just sounded like a depth charge splash. So he parked his bike, and he walked over to this pond. He walked a little ways from his bike, walked over to the pond, and he sees what he thinks is like a creature crouched down on the edge of the pond, and it's reaching down, picking up another rock, like a real big rock, and flings it at him again. And this big thing hits and goes, God, douche, and water flies up. And of course, now he's scared out of his mind. He runs back to his bike. But Byron, his bike is gone now. Bike has been taken. And so he's like, oh crap, what do I do? Do I run home? Do I try to look for my bike? And he decided, he's like, oh my God, it's a long ways and it's cold. I'm going to go try to look for my bike. It can't be far. Where is it? Am I crazy? And he finds it dragged off into the woods a bit. Not where he put it. And he gets on his bike and he hightails out of there. And that's the story. It's not real long. But I still am planning. I'm planning on this spring getting a dive team to try to find those rocks. We're planning just to kind of shore up this story. It'd be really cool to get little divers in there, or underwater cameras, and a little inflatable boat just to find those rocks. Because he said it was like these were like depth charges going off when they hit the water. They were big rocks. And of course, it takes a big creature to throw big rocks, right?
Absolutely.
Those are the type of stories that come out of this strange area.
It's so awesome. It's incredible. All the information is coming out of this one interview I did earlier today. But I just want to say thank you for taking some time out of your busy day and for sharing what you experienced and what you've heard from that area of Rice Creek, Doug. And do you mind if you have a few minutes? I know you've got a lot of really cool stuff going on, but I want to make sure my listeners are aware of how they can keep up to date with what you're working on right now.
Sure. They can catch me on Wednesday nights on Untold Radio AM, on the Untold Radio Network. I'm on Facebook. Usually there's things there. I'm working on Legend Meets Science too. It's been a long project with a lot of delays, but it keeps getting better and better. We're still shooting, and again, my next shoot is February 6th. Just finished one up, and so we're still making great progress on the documentary.
Oh, that's exciting to hear. I can't wait until that comes out for sure. I'm waiting for it, but I know it's going to be awesome. But Doug, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Byron.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.